people were at the poverty level. There were bankers and lawyers and everybody else riding trains looking for work. And at that, President Roosevelt passed the bill to authorize the CCC, that's the Civilian Conservation Corps. And I got a letter in the mail saying that they'd be happy to let me enlist if I were interested in this Civilian Conservation Corps. And in about 1938, we needed the money so badly in that Great Depression that I told Mom that I really thought I should go. And so they finally agreed to it. And so I enlisted in this CCC, and I got on a train in Temple, Oklahoma, and I went all the way out to Elephant Butte, New Mexico on this train. And we were met at some little old off-beat stop. They stopped out in the middle of nowhere, and there was some CCC trucks that came. They were regular military trucks with canvas color, and they came and met us in the middle of the night, and they took us into Elephant Butte, New Mexico. And Elephant Butte was one of the most beautiful places that you can imagine, and it was a very healthy place to be. It was actually a health resort at one time, and all these people, all these young men, we were picked up and carried into Elephant Butte, and we were given nice warm beds, sheets. We were had a military man that showed us how to make our beds and what they expected of us, how we were supposed to keep our stuff. And we made our beds and went to sleep. And they let us even sleep the next day pretty late. And so we didn't have breakfast because we got in so late at night. But we had a good lunch. And so then we were issued our clothing and equipment and so forth, and given jobs. And because I could type a little bit, I got a job as an infirmary attendant. And I helped the doctor dispense the pills, and I kept the records and did some typing on the records. And I wound up with a pretty good job in the CCC camp. And I really enjoyed it because it was very healthy and we had very good food. I liked the doctor that I worked for, and I was kind of interested in helping him take care of the sick, and really got involved and sort of engrossed in what we were doing. And while I was there, they offered me a job with a little bit more money than the infirmary to be the orderly to the officers in the camp. And they wanted somebody that not only looked good but was clean and sanitary and could take care of things. And I kind of hit it off with these officers, so I became the officer's orderly, and had a little bit of leisure time on my hands between serving their breakfast and making up their beds, and cleaning up their rooms, and so forth. And so I worked a little bit in the it wasn't a base exchange, it was a little canteen. I worked in the canteen, and I even made a little bit of extra money there. But those people like to box, and so I put on the gloves with some kids one time. So I'd had quite a bit of experience fighting as a kid, and I did pretty well with the gloves. I just about whipped everybody that came along, and the more people that I fought, the more people that wanted to try me. And so I whipped just about everybody in the Bureau of Reclamation. And I remember one time there was the Captain Kirk had been, I'd never met him. He had been in an automobile accident, and they sent him down to Fort Bliss to the hospital. So he came in, and we had a first sergeant It was just about the meanest guy you ever saw. And when he'd get drunk, he'd beat up on people. And he just really beat them up. I've seen these poor young new recruits just absolutely beat to a pulp with their eyes swollen. They used to come. I had seen them up in the infirmary before I'd gotten my job. And his name was Jiggs, just about the toughest guy you ever saw. And so anyhow, I kept boxing and doing pretty good. And so this Captain Kirk came out, and I was always sort of a clean-looking guy at the time, and I wasn't a guy that you'd pick out as being a boxer. Just if you had to pick out a tough-looking guy, I was probably the last guy in the camp that anybody would have picked out. And so I really got along with Captain Kirk, and he just thought I was the greatest guy in the world. And so one time, there was a guy by the name of Jack Davis that was in charge of the leather works. And he wanted to put on the gloves with me. I think he thought that if he could whip me, it would give him a little bit of a status around the camp. And so he told me, though, that he just wanted to put on the boxing gloves and spar with me. So we were sparring and weren't throwing any real hard punches. And all of a sudden, Jack Davis whipped back a real haymaker, tried to peg me with it. I saw it coming and got out of the way. And I thought, what's this guy trying to prove? So, but I was a lot quicker than Jack, and he telegraphed his punches pretty well. And I let him throw 2 or 3, but he never touched me. And finally, I said, Jack, do you want to box or do you want to spar? He says, let's box. And I hit Jack, and I knocked him down with the first punch. And he got up, and I knocked him down again, and I blacked one eye, and his skin would bruise real easy, and his face just puffed up horribly. And not only that, but I knocked out a tooth, knocked out one of Jack's teeth. And Jack was the biggest mess you ever saw. I just felt kind of guilty when I looked at him because he looked like he had been caught in a forest fire. I mean, this really looked bad. And so Captain Kirk saw him and said, what in the world happened to Jack Davis? And we had a new first sergeant by that time because they'd gotten rid of this old tough guy that was beating up everybody. And this sergeant said, Jack Davis put on the gloves with Wheeler. And Captain Kirk said, with Wheeler? Did Wheeler do that? And this first sergeant was about 6 foot tall, about 6 foot and 4 inches tall, and really pretty husky guy. And he said, Wheeler looks like such a clean-cut young man. And this first sergeant says, Captain Kirk, he said, that guy is clean-cut. But he said, when you put on the boxing gloves with him, he said, you had better duck. He said, I'm a pretty big man. And he said, I would rather stroke a wildcat than to put on the gloves with Glenn Wheeler. And so now a friend of mine told me about this conversation. He was a company clerk, and this company clerk had been beaten up by the former first sergeant, this guy Jiggs that I was telling you about that was so mean. And so this company clerk said, you know, the greatest sorrow of my life is that Jiggs got discharged and sent out of here without fighting with Wheeler. He said if he'd just taken one punch at Wheeler, said we'd have had first sergeant for dinner. So he said that was the greatest regret of his life. So anyhow, I got a report on this conversation. But these people were really good to me. And so I fought a guy and there was another Bureau of Reclamation camp pretty close to Elephant Butte. And they sent their toughest fighters over to fight some of the guys over in our outfit. And there was a major up from Fort Bliss. He was a regular military major who came up to inspect the dining facilities, the living quarters, and so forth, to make sure that we were living sanitarily and wouldn't be polluted or have any food poison or what have you. And he was there one night when I put on the gloves with a real tough guy from this other camp, and he saw me fight. And this guy was tough, but I outboxed him, and I think I got him and knocked him out in about the third round. This major's name was Morgan. And Major Morgan came to Kirk, and he said, came to Captain Kirk, and he said, Captain Kirk, he said, we are having a big tournament down in Fort Bliss, and he said, I believe Wheeler could hold his own real well if he'd like to come down. And he said if he'd like to come, we'd give him invitational orders to come down and do some fighting and pay all of his expenses. And so Captain Kirk said, well, he might. I'll ask him. So Captain Kirk asked me if I'd like to do it. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I'd be down there all by myself, and I'd feel kind of out of place, so I'm not so sure I'd want to go. So anyhow, I finally wound up going. And I went down there and I fought a guy that was supposed to be the best in the whole Ninth Corps area headquarters, just about my weight. And he was good. I mean, the guy was so fast, it was just like boxing a shadow. But he really wasn't that hard of a puncher. He wasn't hurting me, but he was just all over me and stinging me. He was stinging me pretty good with his punches. And I finally got him in a corner, and I just beat him to a pulp in the corner. I left him in the corner. When I got through, he was laying there, and so I won the fight. And so I had the distinction of winning a Corps area tournament in the Army, and wasn't even a member of the Army. I was just there on invitational orders with the CCC camp. So anyhow, I put in my time in the CCC camp, and I got the bug to go back to school. I really decided I wanted to go back to school, and I saved a little bit of money. And I went back, I was discharged and went back to Comanche High School, and I went back to school, got my high school diploma. This was in about I guess in late night in June of 1939 is whenever I just liked a little bit having it, so I got it. And so I was so old.
Wait a second. Okay, now.
I was so old whenever I went back to high school that I felt a little bit out of place because I was about, a good 18, I imagine, almost 19. And that was pretty old for, maybe almost 20, I guess, whenever I got my diploma because I had been out in the CCC camps. But anyhow, one of my dates was one of the people that I went with and actually became engaged to was one of the teachers, and that's how old I was. And I decided that I really didn't want to get married after all, so I as soon as high school was over, I joined the CCC camps again up at Duncan. And when I was at Duncan, I went to Duncan Junior College during the day, and I had a night watchman job at night. And so I did get some college credits at that particular time. And but anyhow, the economy was pretty bad, and I heard of a job down in Nocona, Texas, for a guy that could type. And I had had typing in high school, and I built up my typing speed pretty well when I was in the CCC camps out at Elephant Butte. And so I decided, and when I went back to high school to finish, I took another advanced course in typing. And when I finished, I could type at that time about 60 words a minute and fairly accurately. So they had a big oil boom down in Nocona, Texas.
You know, you had relatives down in Nocona.
Yeah, there was Nocona, Texas, and that was the county of Montague County.
Right.
Montague County.
You had a lot of relatives down there. That's where Aunt Emma is right
now.
Yeah,
well, I went down and I visited them while I was down in
the Leonards.
I visited the Leonards while I was down in Nocona. But anyhow, I worked in this abstract office until we cleared all of the titles. We worked on deeds of trust, warranty deeds, and vendor's liens, and we had to clear all these titles on this oil land so that the people that were coming in there to lease the land would know exactly who had a lien against the property and who had the mineral rights and all of the pertinent facts. And I was a part of this crew that set it up. And so anyhow, we finished the county. We finished all of our work down there. And the person in charge of this abstract office and I became pretty good friends. And he kind of respected me for the work that I was doing. And he told me, said, now I want you to stay in touch with me, and so that I can call you if we get a break. Because where our jobs were important was whenever they'd drill what they call those wildcat wells. And if they would put a well down and hit a good field of oil, then they'd call in these abstract crews to come in to clear the titles. And so he told me that he really liked my work and would like to stay in touch. And so I gave him gave him my address. But I went home and I got kind of bored at home. There wasn't much to do there. And we had done what we call laid the crops by. You know, after a certain period of the year, you lay the crops by and you don't have an awful lot to do. And I just got kind of bored with it, and I decided to go out to Plainview, Texas, and see what I could do out there to maybe find a job. So I went out to Plainview, and I got a little job. I was mowing grass at the Wayland Junior College in Plainview, Texas. And then I worked on Monday. Every Monday, I had a full day's work working at an auction sale, and I was driving cattle through a ring for the people to bid on them, and I was helping load cattle if they bought them. I was just being a handyman. So I was making a pretty good bit of enough to just sort of get by out there in Plainview.
Where is your uncle's living there then?
Yeah, I stayed with Uncle Newt. And but anyhow, another job that I got because of Uncle Newt was candling eggs. You know, buying eggs from all those farmers that brought them in, and you had to candle those eggs to make sure that the yolk was clear. I mean, if the egg had been fertilized and
Egg spots and things.
It could show blood spots in the yolk, and we didn't want that kind. So I learned to candle those eggs to eliminate that kind of egg. And so I had a little job at the grocery store candling eggs on a Saturday, every Saturday and every Monday. So I was putting in 2 days a week. And then I got another job loading at a packing pond. And it wasn't a very pleasant job because it was loading all of these bones from the cattle that they'd killed and butchered and taken the meat off for sausage or hamburger and so forth. And loading those bones was they were paid pretty good, even though it was a depression because it was such an unpleasant job. And so I was doing that a couple of days a week. But one day in a real hot boxcar, I just got absolutely sick because the stench was just pretty bad. And I decided, man, things just aren't going the way I want them to go because I was hopefully waiting for this job to break. And
down in Nakona.
Well, it wasn't in Nakona.
Right, the same company you'd worked for in
Same
Nakona.
company that I'd worked with in Nakona. So anyhow, nothing was breaking, and this job was making me sick. I just felt like upchucking whenever I'd work on that job. So I decided that's not for me. And one day, I was kind of depressed, and I was walking along, and I saw that sign that they came up with in World War II had a finger.
Uncle Sam wants you.
No matter how you looked, that finger would be pointing at you, and the eyes of Uncle Sam would be looking at you. And it had Uncle Sam wants you. And in one of my weaker moments, I said, Uncle Sam, if you take me, you got me. And I went down to the recruiting office, and took a physical, and they said that I was quite a healthy specimen, and they accepted me. And so I went into service. I got on. They gave me a ticket, gave me food rations, so I could eat on the train. And so they put me on the train, and they sent me to Fort Ord, California. And so I went from Plainview all the way out to Fort Ord, California. And when I got there, I was waiting. My cadre was coming in to open up a unit, the Corps of Engineers, but none of them were there. So they attached me to the 11th Cavalry in Fort Ord, awaiting for the Corps of Engineer cadre to come in from Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And so I worked. The first job I had down there was working as a messenger, and they sent me as a messenger up to an orderly room. That's a little administrative headquarters for a little military company. So they sent me up this orderly room to be a runner, and I just sat out on the bench, and whenever they had a message for me to take somewhere, I'd run it over to the regimental headquarters. If they had anything over at regimental headquarters, I'd take it back to the orderly room. And that was my only job. And so I was just sitting out there, and everybody left this orderly room. And I decided that I would sneak. I didn't want anybody to know I was a typist, because the reason I went into the Corps of Engineers is I wanted to learn to be a heavy equipment operator and work on one of those either work on a big bulldozer, or I wanted to work on one of these big cranes. And they had those big cranes, and I was determined to become a heavy equipment operator, because I knew people that were making pretty good money even during the Depression that were doing that sort of thing. Okay, but anyhow, you guys leaving?
No. We left our baby.
Oh, okay.
Renee's going with us.
But anyhow, I didn't want anybody to know I was a typist, because I had already been tipped off that if you could type, and you didn't want to be a typist, you just better not let it be known. But anyhow, everybody left and went to lunch, and they told me to stay there until somebody got back, and then I could go to lunch. So I sneaked in that orderly room, and I grabbed a piece of paper, and man, I was just beating out a letter as fast as I could beat it out, because I wanted to get the letter done and get it and let nobody know I could type. And a captain come through the back flap of the tent, and he looked over at me, and he says, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm Private Wheeler, sir. And he says, what do you do here? And I said, I am the runner. He said, you were the runner. He said, you are now a clerk. Well, I thought I'd surely survive this, because that was the 11th Cavalry. And I told him, I said, I'll be glad. I said, since I'm caught, I'll be your clerk. But I sure don't want it known to the cadre when they come in from Fort Belvoir, because I want to be a heavy equipment operator, and I'm afraid that they knew that I could type, and I do type pretty well. He said, yeah, I observed that. I said, my chances of being a heavy equipment operator, I think, would be rather slim. And he said, I can assure you that that would be the case. And he says, I'll keep your secret, because if you'll do my work for me. And I said, I'll do it. And he did he kept his part of the bargain. But anyhow, I worked and did their typing and their mail, and typed their letters, did their even wrote some, put together certain correspondence. And then I learned to cut special orders, which was to send people on different places on temporary duty. I learned to do that while I was working in that orderly room. And so anyhow, whenever the cadre did come in from Fort Belvoir, they really needed actually kept his word. And he told the people, he said, "No, I made a deal with Wheeler that I wouldn't let the cat out of the bag if he would do administrative work." And for me, and he said, "I'm not going to let him know. I'm going to live up to my deal." But anyhow, one of these, I guess it was a sergeant major, was having all kinds of problems getting some correspondence done because nobody could type. And so he had a kid in this orderly room help him. And this kid that was helping him began to resent all the work he's having to do for that sergeant major from Fort Belvoir. And he said, "What in the world am I doing this for?" He says, "You've got a man." He said, "You've got a man in your outfit that can type circles around me." And he said, "Here I am knocking myself out for you when you got a man that's not doing a thing." And they really, they didn't make me work when the captain came, because this captain was going to keep his word. But anyhow, this guy said, "Who? Who?" And he said, "That Private Wheeler." And he said, "Send Private Wheeler to me." And so I went down and I told him, I said, "Yeah, I can type, but that's the one thing I don't ever want to be is a clerk." I said, "I was a clerk. I worked in an administrative, worked on clearing titles for oil leases, and I hated it. It's sitting in that chair is the most boring thing I can imagine." And I said, "I just don't want to be that." And I said, "I really joined the Corps of Engineers to become a heavy equipment operator." And he said, "Well," he said, "I'll tell you, we don't have anything right now, but we will have that kind of work here eventually." And he says, "I'll keep that in mind, but," he says, "I've got to have some help." And so I went to work for him. And that just about doomed me. I spent a career in the military service doing administrative work, and I later became a sergeant major and an administrative supervisor, and I worked in some of the biggest headquarters that you can imagine. I worked at, I was sergeant major down at Holloman Air Force Base. I was a sergeant major at Edwards Air Force Base. I was a sergeant major of the unit over in Korea, and I just was doomed to do that kind of work, and sort of went through my career hating it. But by the time that I was eligible for discharge, you couldn't be discharged. I was pretty well doomed, but anyhow, I was so sick of that type of work that when I went over into England, I was determined that if I could get out of administration, I wanted to. And so there was a message came in on the teletype that said that anybody who could pass a physical examination and could pass a written test to go in the Air Force could go in and get special training as a gunner. And if they fly 25 missions, they could go right straight home. And at that time, there was just no foreseeable end to when I was going to be or ever get home. And I had a son that I'd never seen. He was born the day that I left the United States in New York. So I got to thinking it over. This is my one chance to make it, if I could make it. And the outfit that I was in was getting ready to go into Europe to fight. They actually made the invasion later, and a lot of that company was killed. So I might have been one of those, because if I'd have stayed in that outfit, I know that they did go in right after D-Day. And I know that an awful lot of those people were killed. And I do know that if I'd have stayed with them, about the only defense that I would have had against the Germans was to throw my typewriter at them, because I was just absolutely bogged down in administration, and that just wasn't the way that I wanted to live. So anyhow, I took the written examination and I took the physical, and I passed it, and did real well, as a matter of fact. And so I went went up to Bovington, England, and I took a special course in shooting from the turrets, from the ball turret, from the top turret, and mounted machine guns, and I was pretty good with those machine guns. I got so good that I could almost have written your name and dotted the I with the guns. So and it kind of pleased me. I was kind of interested in that, and I thought, well, uh, one way or another, I'm in it, and I'm gonna make the very best of it. So uh, after we completed our training at Bovington, they sent us to a little place called Charlie, England, and they were processing us to different organizations as replacement gunners to replace the gunners that were being lost in these aerial combat raids. And they were losing quite a few, incidentally, and some of us began to wonder, have second thoughts about the wisdom of having done what we done. I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of people that were there for one reason or another, but you just heard my reason. And I'm just sick and tired of that typewriter. I hated that thing. So, but anyhow, uh, we had a little bit of fun in Charlie, England, that I'll have to tell you about. Uh, we They were kind of misusing first three graders at this place, and they were giving us sort of menial chores to do, as a matter of fact, and that's something that they really weren't supposed to do. This was belittling a non-commissioned officer to a non-commissioned officer because we had been trained to supervise and to get the optimum work out of the lower-ranking airmen. So they were abusing us a little bit there, and I kind of resented it, and I think all the other non-commissioned officers resented it. And they had a whole group of people, including non-commissioned officers, pouring cement to make tent revetments for tent floors for tents, and they kind of all the non-commissioned officers were very resentful of being used in the manner that they were being used. So we didn't like it. But after we finished that little job, they sent me and a group of people down to pick the worms off of the Duke of Manchester's tomatoes. And we were non-commissioned officers in the service. And we got down there, we were really resentful of that. And so I started a tomato fight right in the Duke of Manchester's garden. I knew a guy that was kind of hot-headed, and I just thought how funny it would be if I hit old Pricky in the back of the head with a tomato. And so I caught him looking away, and I threw one and got him. And I turned around and was just busy as a beaver. And Pricky Sergeant Pricky didn't expect it to be me. He thought it would be one of those lowly privates threw a tomato at him. So he threw a tomato at the guy that he thought did it. And all of a sudden we had the biggest tomato fight that you ever saw in the tomato patch of the Duke of Manchester in England. And so when the Duke of Manchester found out what was going on, he called up that company and he ate this captain out. He says, "What in the world are you doing, sending these wild men down here to pick their worms off my tomatoes?" And so he said, "Well, send them back." And so we knew that captain was pretty much at a loss to do anything to us because it's hard to court-martial a man for not picking worms off of tomatoes. That's just not a very military function. So we really had him over a barrel. But anyhow, somehow or another, the upheaval that it caused got into the First Air Division, and one of the persons that was at the First Air Division was Clark Gable, and he was sort of a public relations man, And they sent him up to our outfit to find out what in the world was wrong. And whenever we saw Clark Gable, we told him that we had that we'd been sent down to pick the worms off of the Duke of Manchester's tomatoes just to make points for that captain down there that was the commandant of this little repo depot. That's a replacement. That's the name that we use for a replacement depot. And so we told him we were just so resentful of it that we just decided to have a uh, little tomato fight. And we had a dandy. And he said, well, that never should have happened. He said that captain was absolutely off base when he sent you down there. And he said, uh, and we told him we kind of resented having to work doing menial chores with uh, instead of privates out there on that job. And so Clark Gable agreed with us 100%, and they relieved, this captain's name was Salthauser. They relieved this Captain Salthauser immediately, and they sent him back to somewhere back in the First Air Division. And I know that they didn't greet him with open arms down there, but they put a fellow in charge that was pretty decent, that really was an old seasoned military man that had the respect that for non-commissioned officers that non-commissioned officers in the old service had grown to expect. And we weren't pansies. We were certainly willing to do what we had to do, but no non-commissioned officer was expected to do these menial things. But anyhow, we got that Captain Torpedo fired, and we got to have a nice conversation with Clark Gable as a result of it. But anyhow,
Wait a second. Now you're about ready to go into combat. But you know you missed a little bit. Of course, you got married, and you mentioned that you had a child. Let's get you married too.
okay,
and,
well.
let's all, let's have Pearl Harbor, and let's get you up to Utah.
Oh, well, I'll have to kind of retrogress here a little bit.
Let's send you down to Indiantown Gap. Let's meet
okay.
private.
Okay.
See what I mean? We passed over.
Okay, let's go back then, and I'll pick up how I came to meet my wife. But anyhow, I was stationed while I was at Fort Ord. They set me up on a special maneuver, and one I'll always remember and cherish. It was up in Mount Rainier, and and it was also in the area of. Let me see if I can remember. Chehalis and Centralia, Washington, and we were laying pontoon bridges across the streams and so forth, and it was really quite an experience and something I enjoyed tremendously. But also, while we were there, they took us on trucks and took us up to the Paradise Lodge on the top of Mount Rainier, and that's the most beautiful place you could imagine. And it was particularly beautiful at the season of the year that we saw it, and it was in the spring. And I remember on the way up to Chehalis, I saw these just herds of young deer, just gorgeous looking animals. And then we got up and they gave us a complete tour of the Paradise Lodge, and I really enjoyed it. But I had a brother that was serving in the Marines down in San Diego, your uncle Hess. And so I wrote to him, and he told me, he said, there's a harbor defense outfit down here in San Diego that we'd sure like to see you transfer into because you'd be out on Point Loma. And he says, I'm not far from there, and we could maybe spend some time together. And we hadn't been together for years, he and I. And I got to thinking about that, and the idea became more attractive to me as I considered it. And finally, I put in for a transfer. And my transfer went through. So I went down to the Harbor Defenses of San Diego, and I was made a Personnel Sergeant Major almost instantly when I got down there. Another administrative job. Now, this is before I ever went to Europe. And while I was there, I was based in the headquarters command, and among other people that were in the headquarters building with me And Uncle Jack and I were very good friends. But he was in the quartermaster, and I was in an administrative outfit called DEML. DEML. And the real abbreviation, what that was the abbreviation for, was the Detached Enlisted Men's List. But we were all doing clerical jobs and only clerical jobs, and so we came up with another name for the DEML. And the name that I came up with for it was Don't Ever Mention Labor. But anyhow, your Uncle Jack and I became pretty good friends. And we spent a lot of time together. We used to go down, go up to the lighthouse and watch the porpoises swim out there on Point Loma.
Cabrillo Lighthouse?
Yeah, up the Cabrillo Lighthouse.
Now it's Cabrillo National Monument now.
Yeah, well, we went up there at that big lighthouse,
Mhm.
and I was in that. I've been up there, I guess, with you. But I was in it long before you came on the scene. But anyway, Jack and I became real good friends. And one time, Jack told me, said, what are you guys doing? I said, well, we don't have anything to do, but there was a guy, I had a really good friend by the name of Sergeant King, and he had an automobile, and he and I were going to just go out and look around San Diego. So your Uncle Jack said, hey, if you guys don't have anything else to do, here's an address I'd like you to come to, and I'd like you to meet my family. And said, we'll come up with something good to eat out there, I'm sure. And so I talked to Sergeant King about it, and he said, hey, this sounds like a pretty good idea. So we did. We went out, and I think I was invited out there to meet your Aunt Lizzie. I really think so.
I'm sure you were.
But because your mother was still just
People have trembled to say so, but I guess now it doesn't matter anymore.
yeah. But anyhow, your mother was just a gorgeous little gal at that particular time, and she just finished high school. And I was 5 years older than she, but when I saw her, I just knew that she was a very special person. And I went along till I was, I kept going out, but I wasn't going out to see your Aunt Lizzie. I was going out to see your mother, who became your mother, the girl that became your mother. And so I met her, I guess, on the 4th of July. This is about around the 4th of July. And on the 2nd of November of 1941, we were married. And that was a month and about 5 days before Pearl Harbor. And when Pearl Harbor came, I was a staff sergeant out at the Harbor Defenses of San Diego. And they called us into duty the day that they bombed Pearl Harbor. They called everybody in. And finally, after we stayed there 2 or 3 nights, they decided that they'd let us go home if we were married and had families, and so that we could be with our wives. But just for appearances, they issued every one of us a .45 with no ammunition whatsoever. I don't think we had enough ammunition on the whole Point Loma at that time to give each man 5 rounds. It was a shame. And if the Japs had landed, again, all I could have done was thrown my typewriter at him and maybe thrown my .45 in for good measure. But they also...
Bang, bang.
Yeah, bang, bang. And they also issued us a gas mask and a steel helmet. And we had to carry that gas mask and that .45 with no ammunition home on the bus or however we happened to travel to go home. And this was strictly for appearances for the civilians that were seeing. They knew they wanted to know us that we were there, and they wanted them to see us looking as combat ready as possible, but we weren't combat ready. Believe me, we were not combat ready. But anyhow, we did put on these appearances because it did get a little charade, but it did get us home. It got us. By doing it, we could get home and be with our family. So it wasn't long after Pearl Harbor until they decided to move that big headquarters, the core area headquarters from San Francisco. They were moving it back to Salt Lake City. And so, being the headquarters of the whole western sector of the United States, they were picking top people to go in there as cadre. And I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay at the Harbor Defenses of San Diego with a detached enlisted men's list. But one of the people that I had worked, one of the officers that I'd worked with, gave me a real high recommendation as an administrator and got me in that cadre very much against my wishes. And so they decided to send me up to Salt Lake City as the advanced cadre to set up the headquarters to receive all of the people from the city of San Francisco to get that big headquarters right off the coast. And so Lily and I went back. Well, I went back first, but it wasn't been about a month, I don't think it was even a month until I had Lily come up and join me up at San Francisco. Up in Salt Lake City. And so anyhow, I was there, I guess, about a year or a little over, and everybody was going to war. Everybody was getting ready to training people, and here I was stuck with my hated typewriter, and I decided to, well, I didn't decide to make this move. It was decided that some of the people would have to go out of that headquarters to go back to Europe, and so I was one of the people that had to go to England to set up what was to become the southern-based section of the command that General Eisenhower came over there a little bit later to take over. Well, I got there before he did to set up this headquarters. But anyhow, I had to leave Lily, and one of the places that they sent me was in Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And this was a real sad place to be. And they had little PFCs that were really bucking to become corporals. And they had, at this time, I was a tech sergeant. And there's an awful lot of master sergeants that were back there. And so they had these little PFCs that were bucking to become corporals. And they were so eager for rank that they didn't care whose toes they stepped on. And some of those junior officers decided that these gung-ho PFCs were pretty good people to put in charge of this, because they would, I think they'd have had their mother shot for one little stripe on the arm. They were just really abusing non-commissioned officers again. And they had one little old PFC that was just a real pain in the neck. And if he saw anything at all or even heard something, he'd go rat, called it rat. Anybody that he could in trouble, because that made him look a little bit better to his superiors as a good, faithful, dedicated
Snitch.
That's about it. And
good, faithful, dedicated staff member.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
A real snitch. So anyhow, a lot of non-commissioned officers got in trouble as a result of this character. And a couple of them even lost a stripe or two. And so we hated that little old PFC with a passion. So after I got over into England, I was at the southern base section of the services supply under what became General Eisenhower's service, his command. And a good friend of mine that hated this PFC as bad as I did, or maybe worse, was his name was Cecil Smith. And so Cecil knew where I went, and Cecil and I became pretty good friends at Indiantown Gap, and we went into together, and we were processed there. We were at a processing center for 2 or 3 weeks together. We became pretty fast friends. And he knew that I had gone to set up this Southern Base Section headquarters. And so we'd been over, I guess, maybe a year, just about a year. And one day I got called on the telephone by Cecil Smith. Cecil Smith wanting Sergeant Major Wheeler. And so I said, I answered. He said, "This is Cecil Smith." He said, "You remember me?" I said, "I certainly do, Cecil." I said, "I'm so glad to hear from you." I said, "It really is a privilege." He said, "Well," he said, "it's a real pleasure for me too." But he said, "I'm going to give you more pleasure than that, Wheeler." He said, "Guess who just reported into my office for assignment?" And I said, "I haven't any idea." He said, "That little PFC from Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania." I said, "How's he doing?" I said, "I'm sure that you greeted him with open arms." And he said, "Well, he's not a PFC anymore. He's a buck private already." And he said, "Let me tell you, Wheeler, he's gonna have some hard living for a while." He said, "I just can't get some of those things out of my craw that we saw him do back in Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania." And he says, "I just couldn't deprive you of the pleasure of knowing that he's mine, all mine." So we had a nice visit over the telephone and a great big laugh about this thing. But anyhow, that takes us.
That little PFC got what he deserved.
Oh, that little PFC must have lived a.
I've known that kind of people, and anything bad that could happen to him is a pleasure.
Oh yeah. So that little PFC, I'm sure, paid a price. I think Cecil was a fair man. My opinion was that he really gave that PFC a bad time, but I'm sure that before that PFC completely caved in with an emotional breakdown, that Cecil must have given him an out some way. But I'm sure he paid the price for his folly at Indiantown Gap. So that was one of the amusing things that happened in my career, was the PFC.
Okay, now we can make a turret ball gunner out of you again.
Okay, I went up to Bovington, the Wash, and I became a gunner. And so finally I got my assignment, and I went into the 384th Bomb Group at Grafton Underwood in England. And one of the first missions that I flew wasn't a real bad one. I saw several planes shot down, but I mean that was par for the course. But I've seen on other raids many more shot down than I did on that particular day. But it was a very sobering thing to fly that first mission. And for the first time in my life, I saw a plane turn in on my plane, and I saw the cowlings, the flashes coming out of the gun barrels. Looked like just the cowlings were just lit up. And I had just a little bit of buck fever, and all of a sudden I thought, my gosh, that guy is shooting at me. And about that time I decided maybe I better shoot him back. And that's that little moment of buck fever that gets a lot of new people that have never faced the enemy in trouble. But thank goodness, it was just a split second with me, and I let them have everything I had. But Willemstad wasn't a bad raid, but it was a very sobering raid because I knew that there were undoubtedly worse things to come, and believe me, there were. But my first raid was flown on November the 3rd, 1943, and that was to Wilhelmshaven, Germany. And on November the 5th, just about 2 days later, I went into Gelsenkirchen, Germany, and I saw some real action. I saw maybe 30 American planes shot right out of the sky, and all those 30 planes had 10 people on them. And
what were you fighting? Focke-Wulfs, Messerschmitt?
Right at that particular time, we were seeing an awful lot of Focke-Wulf 190s, but the Messerschmitts were coming in on us too. I think probably on my Gelsenkirchen raid, let me think, I think we saw, Yeah, we saw Focke-Wulf 190s, we saw Messerschmitt's 109, and we saw some Hinkels 111.
Well, those are bombers, aren't they?
Yeah, well, Hinkel 111 was a fighter bomber.
Mhm.
But what they'd do is they were as fast as bombers. And we didn't have fighter escort at that particular time. We were going in there with no fighter escort whatsoever.
Mhm.
And those Hinkels 111s would stand off at a distance from us and try to shoot us. So they weren't in any jeopardy because at that particular time we didn't have the fighter escort. So I saw more sobering things happen at Gelsenkirchen. Then I didn't fly November the 5th. I didn't fly again until December the 22nd, 1943. Now the reason that I had that kind of a break is that particular time I was flying as an extra gunner. And I would go if somebody was sick on a crew. I'd go if somebody, once in a while they'd get a gunner killed on a plane, and they'd come up short with a gunner. Some of them they'd have to wash them out of the planes with a hose. They was so battered up, especially if they caught a direct burst of flak. It would chew a gunner up pretty badly. So I've had to fly for people that had just been killed, and they were short of crewmen. So I didn't fly from November the 5th until December the 22nd, 1943, and that was Osnabrück. I remember that was the raid that I was in this ball turret. The first two flights I flew in as a gunner on the just an aerial gunner shooting out the side of the plane. But then
the waist gunner.
the waist gunner. So then for Osnabrück, I flew in the ball.
Mhm.
And I was just a little bit too big for that ball. I was absolutely cramped in there and was almost like a sardine. And so when I got back from Osnabrück, I told them that was just absolutely cramping to me because I was a little bigger than the average guy. And so they did hear me and considered what I'd said. And it was true. It was just, by the time I got out of there, I was just so stiff and miserable and cramped. Could have had no room. And I couldn't.
Tough enough to go to war when you're comfortable,
Yeah.
right?
So then I got out of the ball turret after Osnabrück, and then they switched me into the tail. And that tail is the hottest place on the ship. But I was so glad to be out of that cramped ball turret back here in the tail, where I could have freedom of movement and not be cramped, that I wouldn't have complained if they'd have hung me with a new rope. I was really delighted to be, at least if I was going to die, I'd die comfortable. And from then on, I flew the tail position, but that ball turret was the most miserable experience I ever had in my life. Then Ludwigshafen was my next raid on January the 7th. Ludwigshafen. On January the 7th, 1944.
When did you pick up the Black Cat?
Oh, I picked up the Black Cat. I think my first raid with the Black Cat was my next raid. I had torn my flight coveralls, and I got a new pair of coveralls and just before we went to strafe an airfield and bomb a German airfield at Le Millard and Prusville, France. This was German bases out in French territory. And we could do that. We couldn't bomb a French city, but we could certainly bomb an airfield. And so I got this new pair of coveralls, and I found this little glass Black Cat with the most weird-looking golden eyes that you've ever seen. And that was just before my French raid on January the 14th, 1944. Then my next raid after that was January the 21st, 1944.
Let's not just go through the raids real quick. Let's just talk about things that happened on the raid, and also let's catch what happened with that Black Cat.
Well, the little old Black Cat, I flew the mission, And I didn't know that I had this little old glass black cat in my pocket until I got back. And it was a pretty bad raid. And we lost some people. And when I reached in my pocket, I pulled out that weird looking little black cat. I thought, my gosh, no wonder that was a bad raid. I had this weird looking black cat, glass black cat in my pocket. And I drew my hand back to throw that thing. And then all of a sudden, it hit me that it was a little rough for everybody else, but I'm still here. Maybe I ought to be a little more tolerant of this black cat. So I stuck that little old glass black cat back in my pocket. And I said, well, I'll ride with him another time and see if I survive again. And so I rode this, I went to the next mission, and another tough mission, but a lot of people didn't make it, but I did. And then I began to think, hey, maybe this is a lucky charm. Maybe I better keep it. So I kept hanging on to it. And then I kept going on raids, and one time I went on a raid with 210 men, and the Germans, what happened on this particular raid, it really,
Which raid was it?
It was I'll have to look, it was Gelsenkirchen. No, I'm sorry. The big bad one was Oschersleben, and it should have been a milk run. But what happened? No, I don't think right. What really happened is the weather was real bad, and they never should have sent us up. But we got up there, and we were having all kinds of trouble holding a tight formation. And so we were I was in the lead flight, and we got clear over German territory. And whenever they decided to scrub this mission, and whenever you get over enemy territory, the enemy can jam the network, and you can't pick up the recall. And they jammed this network where all you could hear when you listened in was just rah, 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 rah noises, where they jammed the network. And we didn't pick up the recall. And when they scrubbed the mission, everybody else peeled off and went home. And this lead outfit that I was in didn't pick up the recall, and we went barreling on in. And I remember Oschersleben was one of the, I think it was the second raid that we ever had fighter escort. And we were briefed that right after we crossed the Zuider Zee in Holland, that we'd pick up our first fighter escort. Well, we didn't, because when they scrubbed the mission, they scrubbed the fighter escort. And we didn't pick up the recall, and we were barreling. And so I looked at my watch at about the time that we were supposed to have our first fighter escort, and I looked up and I saw all kinds of fighters off in the distance. And I said, well, they're just about on time. And I looked again, and it wasn't our escort. It was Focke-Wulf 190s and ME-109s. And they started hitting us just about Holland, and they just kept, there was, I think it was one whole division got in there, and there was 21 planes in each of the groups, and there was 3 groups that got in there. That was 3 times 21, that's 63. So there's about 189 planes that actually didn't get a recall that were going in. And by the time that we turned on our IP to make our bomb run in on Oschersleben, there was only 7 planes out of my group of 21 planes that were left to turn on the IP to make the bomb run. But we made one of the most beautiful bombings that you can imagine. We hit the target, and we just about annihilated. We really zeroed in on it with those few planes. But the Germans wanted us so bad that they were flying through their own ACAC to try to get us. And by the time we turned off the bomb run, we did a sharp chandelle off that bomb run and started back. I think there was only 3 planes out of the 7 that turned on the IP to make the bomb run. And whenever we looked over and saw a group of 21 that still hadn't been touched. Maybe they were flying a tighter formation, but they had just about wiped out our outfit. So we ran over. We just really turned on really, they opened those throttles full barrel, and we pulled over and attached ourselves to that 21 planes. And I was flying tail end Charlie to tail end Charlie. That's a very vulnerable place, but it's better than being out there alone. And the only thing is I was far enough back that I could really call for evasive action. And I remember one time that I called for evasive action, and we went down, and I saw the tracers come right where we would have been if we hadn't dropped down real low in evasive action. And you know what it did? It shot the plane out of the formation that was tail end Charlie and ahead of me, and we moved into the tail end Charlie's position, and we were no longer tail end Charlie to tail end Charlie, and we were tail end Charlie. I mean, we were hanging right in there a little tighter in that formation. And man, I went to work on those guns, and we fought a hard battle, but they fought us all the way clear back. We went in over the Zuider Zee in Holland, and we were briefed to come out, and we came out, I remember, between Ostend and Dunkirk, France. That's how we were leaving the enemy territory. And we'd done this a couple of times before. This was the Germans, the ACAC couldn't reach us from Ostend, and it couldn't reach us from Dunkirk. It would fall short, and we were just going right down the middle. And what they'd done is they'd laid a track out there and put a flak train. And we'd already dropped our bombs, so they weren't vulnerable to be bombed. And so that flak train opened up on us, and it got some of the planes that
You didn't really have a corridor anymore.
So we didn't have a corridor to escape between Ostend and Dunkirk. And I remember when we got, I come so close to getting it this particular day, I'll just never forget it. This guy came in, and I called for, I'm shooting, but we called for evasive action. And this guy, I was looking right in his gun barrels whenever this thing done, and I laid some tracers right into him. And so he peeled off, and pretty soon he caught on fire. But that guy come awful close to getting me. I was looking in the gun barrel, but I let him have it. But anyhow, we got out over the English Channel, and we had no escort. Nobody had done a thing. But we looked down, we saw a British Spitfire channel sweep. And so the commander called in to this British Spitfire channel sweep and said, if we come down, could you give us some help? And they says, come on down. See, at that particular time, the Spitfires weren't equipped with superchargers. And without superchargers, they couldn't get enough oxygen out of that light air up there.
Yeah. So you had to go down to him.
So to come up and help us. And when they invited us to come down, I mean, we just dove down. We dove right down. With them big old bombers, we just almost fell out of that sky to get down below those Spitfires. And when we got below those Spitfires, I mean, at that altitude, a Spitfire couldn't do anything up there at a higher altitude. But when you get down there, that Spitfire could whip anything flying. At that altitude, that Focke-Wulf 190 and Messerschmitt 109 were no match. And they really peeled those Germans off of our tails. Well, that was the hardest raid I ever flew. And that happened to be my 13th raid.
Oh.
And by that time,
The Black Cat was there to stay.
so I had second thoughts about that Black Cat. I thought, my gosh, that's the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody. But anyhow, that day, there was another plane that survived from our base, but we didn't know it until the next day. He'd run short of fuel and had to land at a little old fighter base. And the runway wasn't long enough to accommodate that bomber. So that bomber ran the full length of that of that fighter base runway and ran through a rail fence, and it just couldn't stop. And so we didn't know that when I got home, there was just me and 9 people left out of that raid. And I thought, man, oh man, what about my black cat? Then I thought again, hey, I'm with it. I'm still here. And when I thought it over seriously, I thought nothing on this earth will ever separate me from my black cat. And I resolved that if I ever survived the raid, I was going to take that black cat home, and I was going to let my family see my little charm. But anyhow, I went ahead and finished all of my missions.
Well, let's wait a minute. You got some flack in 2 places.
Oh yeah, okay.
You're skipping some important stuff. Didn't you one time? Didn't your plane come in with some kind of a split in the fuselage?
Oh yeah,
See, you're forgetting an awful lot.
Okay,
of stuff.
well that was really on my.
You can look at your cheat sheet. You can see.
Well, on my the big raid where we got a big hole knocked in the fuselage, and it we cut a direct burst of flak, and this hole was so big that it really weakened the whole frame of the plane, and so we were worried that the plane wouldn't hold together, and we was afraid it would break in two. So whenever we went in for a landing, everybody got up in the radio room and put their back up against the wall in the radio room, and we either had our back against the wall, or we had somebody right in front of us with their back against ours. And so we went in hoping that if that thing buckled, we'd survive when we went in for a landing. And that thing didn't buckle. It did buckle, but it didn't break. Mm-hmm. And the plane was sagging. So I couldn't believe it, but in about 2 days, that plane had ribs, new ribs in the whole thing. And that thing looked as good as new. Mm-hmm. And we flew it after that. But another time, we had a great big hole knocked right through the plane. And I think maybe among my pictures, we might, if we look, we could find a picture of my head sticking out
the hole. I've seen that.
Have you ever seen that picture of my head sticking out the hole?
It must still exist because I've seen it.
And then another time that I was up on a raid, and I don't remember exactly which one, but I remember there was a hightail, a German came out of the sun on a hightail shot. And so he opened up and he hit these ammunition boxes right behind me. And whenever he hit the ammunition boxes behind me, it startled me. And I turned my head, and a 20 millimeter went right through where my head would have been if I hadn't have turned it. And here's one of the things that I know that somebody was looking after me. That 20 millimeter was supposed to detonate when it went through the thickness of about, I think, a piece of wood that thick would have detonated that 20 millimeter. That 20 millimeter did not detonate. It went through plexiglass that thick over on this side and that thick over on this side and never detonated. And if it had detonated, it would have blown my head plumb off. And whenever we got back,
yeah, 20 millimeter is a pretty good sized shell.
That's a pretty big shell, a lot bigger than 50 caliber.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
But anyhow, when we got back, we went out on our revetment, and I was out of the plane, and I stepped out of the waist, and I went back around to get in the back door to take the guns out of the tail. We called it the stinger. I went back to get the guns out of the stinger, and so there's some people come up and saw that plexiglass and all those holes where the ammunition box was hit. Oh, it had all those little cubes of powder laying on the catwalk out of those 50 caliber cartridges, and I felt a little bit sensitive about walking on that powder with my shoes. I was afraid I'd ignite it, but they told me that would have been a very remote possibility. But at least made me think. But anyhow, these people come over and saw this plane so badly shot up,
Wondered where the body was.
and they wanted to know where the body was. And I said, well, right here's the only thing I got. Here's a little piece of 20 millimeter frag that came out through the ammunition box, and that got me right here on the hand. And I pulled another little piece of metal out of my tail end.
Well, you were a tail gunner.
Yeah, well, I got shot in the tail, back in the tail.
Hey, tell me about the occasion when when your mother was having the nightmare about you.
Oh, we went to a marshalling yard. Now, I can't remember whether it was Ham or, anyhow, it was a big marshalling yard. And I remember it was the most beautiful sight that I've ever seen. It was right alongside the Rhine River. And they had some pretty big ships in there on that Rhine River. And it was just a gorgeous place to see. But I remember looking down on that, and I remember the worst barrage of flak I have ever heard and seen in my life. It just shook our plane, and there were some holes came through the fuselage, and we went into a real tight turn, and they shot something. They shot the manual controls out, and we went into a dive. And I remember, I don't know why I said it, but I remember this is what came out of my mouth. I said, Mom, it looks like they've got me. And I just said, I don't know why. I said, Mom, I could have said Lily, but it said, Mom, it looks like they've got me. And my mom was over here in the United States, and she told me that she heard me say that. And she said she dropped right down on her knees and went to praying. And we went into this dive, and I just knew that we were goner because I was suspended in the air, and I was looking, and suspended in this air with me was 50 caliber shells, expended cartridges of 50 caliber shells that were just suspended in the air while we were falling. And Lieutenant Buska managed to get that thing switched from from manual control into automatic pilot. And we pulled out way down low. And we said, well, we're out of formation, so we're goners. But we hit a big, heavy cloud bank. And that cloud bank lasted and lasted and lasted. And when we came out, there was no Germans around us. We just come out of that cloud bank as sweet as could be. And we were flying out in the open for a little while. And I looked over and I saw some planes off in the distance. And I said, uh-oh, here we go again. And there was another cloud bank. It was a little bit off course. And so he made a run for that. We got into that cloud bank before they got to us. And when we came out of that cloud bank, we came over the English Channel and we picked up some Spitfires. And man, oh man alive, that was just like pennies from heaven. So I don't know, I know that I'm living on borrowed time. I've always said that. But I know that's one reason that I'm kind of thrilled at my patriarchal blessing. If you read my patriarchal blessing, it says that I have been delivered from the enemy time after time. Have you read it?
Says that literally. You made a covenant with the Lord in one of those raids.
Well, in one of those raids, I think I did. One of those raids, I think I was a foxhole Christian. I said, Lord, I don't know what I can ever do to repay you. I don't know much about religion, but if you'll spare my life here, and you'll reveal to me how I could serve you to repay you, I promise you that I'll do my very best. And I made that promise right up there in that sky. And that little promise, incidentally, was just before we pulled out on the automatic pilot.
Oh, same raid.
That same raid.
Yeah. I never put that together.
And that was my foxhole Christian experience. And I have tried to, I've taken a few jobs that I really didn't want just because I made that little promise. So I was a foxhole Christian.
Old Reliable. It's a name I haven't heard all night tonight.
Well, Old Reliable was a plane that we had. I flew Old Reliable almost all the way through my raids. And I must have missed their few at the beginning. But Old Reliable, that thing came in shot up time after time. We had a top-notch crew that could put that thing back together and make it look like it hadn't been hit at all. And Old Reliable was a very popular ship because it was the one that kept coming back, and it was the ship that brought me back whenever I was the only plane that landed with the 10 people in it. The other one crash landed through the rail fence at the end of the fighter field. So Old Reliable was a very, very dear plane to us. And I ran into General Smith. He was a great big tall fellow, must have been about 6 foot, 6 or 7 inches tall. I run out him out here at March Air Force Base, and I walked over to him and I said, "I recognize you." I said, "I was in your command." And he said, "When were you there?" And I told him between 1943 and 1944. He says, "Yes, I remember it well." And I said, "I don't know if you remember me, but I think you might remember our plane." I said, "We flew Old Reliable." And he says, "You know, Old Reliable never was shot down in England."
They sent it to North Africa.
They said they sent that thing to North Africa, and he said it was becoming a little bit obsolete. It had been so battered and badgered that they did. He sort of gave it up willingly, and so they said they sent that thing to North Africa, and said it went down on its first raid out of North Africa. I said, "Well, it served England very well because I flew all my missions in it except maybe 4 or 5. So we had quite a talk, and he remembered Old Reliable. He didn't remember Glenn Wheeler, but he sure did remember Old Reliable because it was the most, it survived more missions than any other plane that flew in the era of 43 and 44.
You were in the 8th Air Force, and of course everybody knows of Jimmy Doolittle, not for being there in the 8th Air Force.
Don't mention.
But they know of Jimmy Doolittle from later on in the Pacific. Now, he was your best friend, because when you got to your 23rd raid, what happened?
Well,
You had 2 to go.
I had 2 raids to go whenever General Doolittle took command over in the 8th Air Force. And the first order that General Doolittle gave was that they'd raise the ante from 25 missions to 30 missions, which meant I no longer had 2 to go, I had 7 to go. And anybody that flies 7 missions knows that you can get killed as dead on that last one as you can on that first one. And a guy's nerves starts getting a little thin when you go to get close to that day, and all of a sudden they increased the ante from 2 missions to go to 7 missions to go. And I'll tell you this, if General Doolittle had walked on the field at the 384th Bomb Group and we'd have seen him, I think that every gunner in the outfit would have opened fire on him, because we knew that a lot of the people that were alive at that time, that were that close to the end of their raids, was going to be very, very dead before they finished them. And they were. A lot of people that would have shot him just for the pleasure of watching him died. I was one of the lucky ones that didn't. I went ahead and survived them all. But Jimmy Doolittle wasn't very popular with the people that were that close to the end when he raised the ante.
Well, you got through your 30 missions, and you went to take a shower, and you put the black cat on the ledge.
Just put it up above my bed. I was just going to lay it there. And I should have secured it because that black cat disappeared. I know that there was a lot of people that were aware that my black cat was my lucky charm. And I remember that when several times when we'd come back from raids, new gunners would go out and would come in. They'd go on a raid with us, and it would be a bad raid. And all of these kids would ask, does anybody ever survive these raids? And my friends used to say, see that guy right over there? And they'd point at me and said, his name is Wheeler. And said, if you're lucky enough to get back from a raid, you'll always see that fella standing around grinning because he lives a charmed life. And so my black cat became a symbol to everybody that knew me and knew of my black cat. That black cat, in the minds of all my friends, just had to be the reasons for my survival. And I'm sure that there was any number of people that would have stolen that thing at the drop of a hat. And the day I finished my 30th raid, I laid it up there and run out to take a quick shower, and I come back and it was gone.
I figured you didn't need it. You'd done your thing. They wanted to live.
Yeah, I said, where is my black cat? Nobody said a word. Nobody said a word. And I said, well, that's exactly what I said. It served me well. Maybe it'll serve somebody else. But I said, I really intended to give that to my children someday as a souvenir. When I went on to the great beyond, I was going to leave my black cat behind. So I don't think anybody, I think whoever stole that black cat stole it in the hope of surviving a war. I don't think he stole it because he was necessarily a crook. It was just people grab at straws whenever people are dying like flies.
It's kind of desperate means.
It's a desperate means to a very desperate end, you know. So I've never felt malicious about it. That little old black cat had a special place in my, you know, I always said that I used to maintain that I wasn't superstitious. But after the black cat thing, I have to face the bullet, bite the bullet and say, Glenn Wheeler, you're just as suspicious as the next fella. I mean, superstitious is the next guy. Because that black cat became a real symbol to me. And I think if I'd have had to flown a raid without that black cat, I'd have felt naked and nervous. You know?
You had a policy, and there was some wisdom behind this policy that if you were unable to make your run for whatever reason, that you were to dump your bombs at the earliest target of opportunity, so that you didn't have to land with the bombs, which would create a dangerous situation. Now, that particular rule, as it were, caused you some pretty rough moments. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, we went to, our target was Munster. I'm pretty sure it was Munster, yeah. And it was clear when we got to the target. And our weather predictions were usually pretty good. But when we got to the target, it was completely socked in. We couldn't see a thing. And ordinarily, when we expected to be socked in, that didn't keep us from going. Because in the latter part of the missions that I flew, we had pathfinders. And with a pathfinder, you could go over in the biggest overcast in the world, or you could go over at the blackest night, and with a pathfinder, you could just about stick a bomb in somebody's chimney. It was that good. But the weather people were so sure that this target would be clear that they didn't send the pathfinder. And when we got over there, we couldn't bomb. We couldn't see. So General Travis just gave the order to no bombs. We'll go back. We'll turn around, and we'll go back and we'll bomb the first target of opportunity. And we were just waiting for those clouds to break. And all of a sudden, the clouds did break. And there was a village down there. It didn't have a single smokestack in it. It didn't have a railroad track going through it. There was not the slightest chance that that place could have been a place where munitions of war were produced. It was just not the remotest possibility. It was just a little old village, and I thought at the time nobody could be down there except Lady Schicklgruber and her cows and their chickens and their pigs, and surely they won't bomb that. And there was about 3,000 planes in the sky. And you know, General Travis, who died up here at Fairfield Susu Air Force Base, and uh,
Well, it's not named Travis after him.
after he died, they changed the base from Fairfield Suisun Air Force Base to Travis Air Force Base. He gave the order, bombs away, and I never saw such. I saw a cloud of bombs going down in that general proximity, and an awful lot of them were just going right in on that little old village, and we annihilated that village. I don't imagine that there was a little mouse. I don't think a mouse, no cat, no chicken, nothing in that village could have survived. It was just a ball of fire down there because we had napalm, we had blockbusters, we had all kinds of incendiaries, and we just annihilated that village. And I remember when I saw those bombs going down on that little village, I thought, my God, if the Germans come up and want to kill us today, I'm not going to blame them. But then I had second thoughts. They hadn't better tried, you know. But I felt real bad about that particular raid.
Hard to stomach something like that.
It was the hardest thing I
Troubled
ever
you for a
saw.
long time.
Yeah, that really preyed on me a lot. Another thing that I'll tell you about was I had a real good friend by the name of Johnny Pastrelli. And Johnny was one of the nicest kids that I've ever known. He was a Catholic boy, and that's not my religion. But I really had the deepest of respect for this young man, and I'll tell you why. He was one of the few people that I've known that lived in the combat hut with some of the toughest people in the world, and I was one of those pretty tough guys back in my day. And this kid, whenever he got ready to go to bed, he had the fortitude to drop right down on his knees by the side of that bed and say his prayer. And he was so respected by everybody in that hut that when Johnny got on his knees to say the prayer, everything stopped. It was quiet as a pin. And when Johnny got through saying his prayer, everybody would say, okay, I'll raise you, I'll call you, and the poker game continued. But when Johnny would say his prayers, that place would stop. And when Johnny got up in the morning, everybody would be up and talking, a little noisy, but the first thing Johnny did was to get out of that bed and fall right on his knees beside that bed and say his prayer. And when people saw that Johnny was saying his prayer, if somebody didn't see it, then everybody said, shh, 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 be quiet, 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 so that Johnny could peacefully say his prayer. And old Johnny flew on my wing many times, and he was dead. I even flew a couple of raids with him when I was flying extra gunner, and he was a dead game guy. I mean, he was all there, cold.
It was all business.
All business, and all his steady nerves.
Fearless. Yeah.
Fearless.
Tell me about him.
A real tough, a real honest to goodness, wonderful man with grit, and the kind of a guy that you couldn't help but respect. And so old Johnny woke me up one time about, I was stood down, I didn't have to fly. And they usually wake you up by 4 o'clock in the morning when you go on a raid, because you had to go down, you had to have breakfast, you had to go down to the armament shop, you had to get dressed in your flight suit, your heated suit. You had to get those coveralls, then you had to be taken across the armament, had to pick up your arms and a weapons carrier, take them out to the plane, install them, and try to be ready for takeoff by daylight. And or sometimes.
Did you wear a separate flak jacket, or was that built into the?
We had flak jackets, a regular separate flak jacket.
That's what I thought, but you didn't mention it, so I was wondering.
Well, anyhow, back to Johnny. He woke me up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And one thing I want to tell you, people strangely have premonitions that they're going to die whenever they're flying combat. And I've never seen a human being that had a premonition that he was going to she'd get this ready, and get somebody to promise to do certain things for him. And so Johnny woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, Wheeler, I hate to disturb you, but he said, I want some things done. And he said, I'm not coming back tonight. He said, I know that. And he said, I want some things done. And he said, I know that you'll do what I want. And he said, it's very important to me. And he said, here is a package that I want you to throw away. Here's a package that I want sent to this girl, his fiance. And he said, here is something that I want you to send home to her mom. And he said, the rest of the stuff, just let them pick it up. And I said, John, you can be sure that I'll do that. But I said, I want you to get that out of your craw right now, and I want you to go out there and I want you to get out there and go tonight, and I'll see you when you get back. And I said, get this out of your mind. And so anyhow, I couldn't go to sleep to save my life after Johnny woke me up. So I just couldn't sleep. So I went and I got the big old coal bucket, and I got a bunch of wood, kindling, and I started the fire in the old nest hut. As a matter of fact, I built a fire on both ends of the nest hut. And whenever the place got kind of warm, some of the guys that were stood down with me, there's always certain people stood down. If you don't, people crack up if they fly forever. Mm-hmm. And so, good night. And so these kids woke up and they said, Wheeler, what in the world are you doing out of bed? And I said, well, I couldn't sleep. And they said, Wheeler, when you get to where you can't sleep, he said, it'll be World War III, not World War II. And you're one of the few people that can sleep on a rock anytime, anywhere. He said, we know you can sleep because we hear you snore. And said, you're asleep, and you can sleep after the roughest raid in the world when everybody else is walking around too nervous to sleep, and you're sitting over there just sawing log. And he said, we don't believe that you couldn't sleep. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I said, Johnny had a premonition. And when I said Johnny had a premonition, everybody in that whole listen hut come up out of that bed like it's being resurrected. And he says, Johnny? I said, yeah, Johnny had a premonition. And everybody not only sat up in bed, everybody got out and come to ask me questions.
Hear all the details, huh?
Wanted all the details. And that particular morning, we were stood down, and for a bunch of combat men to go to breakfast on their day off is like a sailor going for a boat ride after a 6-month cruise. You want to kick back, And so nobody could sleep, so we got up and went to breakfast, and we ate ground gripper breakfast. What that means is we call people that didn't fly, we call them ground grippers. And what the ground grippers ate was powdered eggs. And what the flyboys ate was eggs, real eggs, cooked any way you want them. You had your last rites every morning before you left on a raid, and among those last rites were eggs cooked as you chose them to be. But we went to the ground grippers breakfast and ate powdered eggs and recombined milk and some of those terrible things that ground grippers ate. And when we got back, they just had it carried on in their normal way. They had their poker games and told their little stories, and it was a pretty cold day. And Johnny was due back. It was a pretty deep penetration, and they were due back at about 2 o'clock, 1 or 2 o'clock. It was Oberhoffenpoffen was the name of the target that Johnny got it.
One that you had hit yourself.
Yeah. No, I'd hit it, but it was a bad one. And but anyhow, Johnny didn't come back, and every plane came back that day except John's. And Norm Adair, did you ever meet Norm Adair? He was a guy from down San Clemente.
I don't know whether I have or not.
You've heard me talk about him. Well, anyhow, Norman was a good friend of mine, and he's one of the few people that survived out of the initial crew. I out of about 3,000 that actually started, there was about, I think General Smith told me there's about 20 of us out of the initial increment that wound up finishing. And Norm was one of those.
20 out of 3,000.
So anyhow, Norm was one of those. And so I said, Norm, well, we couldn't go across. We had to wait till the weapons carriers came in. And Norm was one of the first that came in. I said, Norm, what happened to Johnny? He said, it's unbelievable, Wheeler. He said, we were flying along in a formation. It wasn't real bad. The ACAC ground fire was very light. But he said it looked like that one of the few 88 millimeters that came up from the ground hit Johnny's plane right in the bomb bay. And he said that plane just was boof. And he said it, he said whenever just a ball of fire, and he said it exploded and it rocked the whole formation. And he says there's planes out there that's got shrapnel, sprags from the bombs in the fuselages. But he said nobody had any serious trouble, and poof, Johnny was gone. He said just gone. And said it wasn't enemy aircraft, it was just a stray 88 millimeter from the ground. And so when he said that, the whole crew, everybody in the hut, quit their poker and everything else just before the flight come in. We walked out the flight line, and that's something that flyboys never do, is go watch the planes come in. That's stupid. Just thank gosh you're not one of them. But we all went down on account of their respect for Johnny. And so when he told us that Johnny didn't make it, what happened? We just turned and walked back and went back to the hut. Nothing more was said about it. Nobody, we didn't discuss it on the way back.
Almost like it was a jinx to talk about it.
Yeah, just like a jinx to talk about. So, but anyhow, after Johnny, I got pretty mean. I did some things that I might not have done. I'd think of Johnny, and if I could see a cow in a field, and I was low enough, I'd blast away, hoping that some German had starved to death. You know, they paid a price for Johnny. And but anyhow, Johnny was a very special person to me, just because of the caliber of person he really was. And he was a special person to everybody that knew him. Just one of those rare people that had the quality about him that everybody had to respect, no matter how mean and rotten you were. That kind of a guy, just, people liked, had it all. And I'm sure that the Germans paid a price for that, because I'm sure every one of us, every time we thought of Johnny, somebody got an extra burst, Mm-hmm. So, but Johnny was very special. But then I finished my raids and I came home. On the way home from New York, I had a sort of an interesting experience. I was put in charge of a troop train. And did I tell you about this?
Well, I'd like you to tell me about that, but before you came back, you had an occasion to, in a way, chauffeur around Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh, yeah.
I think we ought to tell that before we get you out of England.
Okay, well, while I was in England, while I was still an administrator, I used to dress pretty snappy, because, you do whenever you're in a headquarters working for the commanding general. Why, you get in the habit of looking your very best. And I was a pretty sharp dresser when I was young, and my shoes were shined with a spit shine. And so Eleanor Roosevelt came in, and she was being escorted around England with the Queen. The Queen and Eleanor were making this tour together. And one of the things that they were considering was bringing the wax into England. And they wanted us to give them a tour. And so they picked some special people to take them on this tour. And because I was a fairly snappy dresser at that time, and fairly military in my bearing and everything, I was picked. so they sent me up, and I met her, and I was introduced to she and the Queen, and told that I would be their escort at this particular base, and I would take them here and there. Of course, we had people from that base that were guiding us, but I was the one that was supposed to be their direct escort. And they were really nice. I mean, I was really more impressed with the Queen than I was Eleanor, because Eleanor was kind of caught in her own orbit and wasn't looking very far beyond what her purpose was, or at least didn't seem to be. And the Queen was just pretty genuinely nice, you know.
Very personable.
Very personable and very friendly and very gracious, and thanked me for just about every little thing I did. And but anyhow, I was chosen to do that, and I was one of my interesting experiences, as I got to escort Eleanor Roosevelt, the Queen. Simply for no other reason except I was just a pretty snappy dresser with a fairly military bearing about me, and they wanted somebody that looked that way to be her escort.
Let's talk about the troop ship now, that you were just about ready to talk about.
Well, that troop ship. You're talking about the troop train.
Troop train, yeah.
Okay. Well, when I got back to New York, they put me in charge of a troop train, and all these men, and we got on this troop train, and they had it was nothing but GIs aboard, and they had a big dining car on there, and we went back to that dining car, and the food that they served us was crap. And not only that, but they served, and they were taking a meal ticket. At that time, I think it was about $3 or $4 per meal ticket. And then even then, $3 or $4 was like $10 or $15 today. It really was, you know. And we expected some food, and we got there, and it was nothing. One occasion they brought just a little plate of oatmeal, and a little bit of sugar, and a little bit of cream.
Uh-oh, food fight's coming up.
So I looked at that crap, and I said to all those troops, I said, I'm going to court-martial the first man that eats any of this garbage. And I said, furthermore, I said to this guy, this head cook, I said, get this crap out of here, and you get it out in a big hurry, or we're going to dump it right on the floor. And boy, his crew come out there, and they picked that stuff up, and they sent the head man out there to talk to me.
Somebody was skimming.
And he says, what's the matter? I said, you're not giving us that kind of crap for the money that you're about to take from us. I said, I don't know how many people you've done this to, but I said, we're not eating that crap. And I said, unless you can bring some food out here, I said, we don't want to see you again. Just get out of our way. Don't let us see you unless you do what you're supposed to do and feed us. So he said, okay. He said, I'll talk to my men. And he went back and they talked to him. And I had all these GIs standing there wondering if they was going to starve to death all the way to California, because their old sergeant was too damn tough to eat the garbage. I said, just be patient. I said, we're either going to eat or we're going to wreck this train. So they came out and they said, okay, we've got some ham, and said, would you guys settle for ham and eggs? And I said, could you make a little gravy?
Maybe some biscuits.
and some hot biscuits. And he said, yeah, but we'll have to have some time. I said, how much time? And they told me how long. And I said, well, I'll bring the men back for dinner, and for breakfast, and we'll eat a little later. And so when I went back, they sent for me, and they brought me a plate that had ham on it, about that thick. I had 2 eggs. I think we had hominy grits and gravy on that plate, and they had coffee, and they had milk, and what else? Oh, it had hot biscuits. And they said, now, will this be all right? And I said, yeah, it'll be all right if the lowest private on this outfit gets just as much food as I got. And I says, if they don't, this is going to be totally unsatisfactory. And boy, they brought us a meal, and you know they stopped that troop train at the next town,
Pick up some more
and
food.
they called ahead, and they said we've got to have food on this train, or this train is going to be completely Bolshevik. Said they got a man out here that's crazy, and so they wired ahead, and we got into. I can't remember the name of the town, but it was before we got to Chicago, and you never saw so much food come on a train in your life, and they fed us. We had a banquet, and you know there was a lieutenant colonel.
I bet you those men loved you.
No, they were. Whenever I left that train, the guys lined up to shake my hand. But anyhow, there was a lieutenant colonel. With little, you know how some of those people they had no guts, no grit. He said, Sarge, don't you think you'd be a little hard? I said, well, maybe so. This is before we got our good breakfast. I said, maybe so, but I said, I don't think that's right, and they're not going to skim off of this crew of men. I said, I just happen to be in charge, and that's the way it's going to be, Colonel. He said, well, okay. He said, I'm with you, but he said, I was a little worried. Hoping you don't get in any trouble. I said, well, I can stand it. And after we started eating like kings, that colonel said, that was the greatest thing you ever did.
Yeah, but now he's on your side.
Yeah, he got on my side, but some of those lily-livered colonels, they haven't got enough fortitude to, well, I don't want to get into my...
Well, they're too close to general to have any guts.
Oh, yeah,
They're afraid to make a mistake.
afraid that their career would be shattered. But I at that particular time, I fully intended to terminate my career as quick as possible. That it turned out that I didn't. But at that particular time, I didn't want them skimming off of that troop train, and they didn't skim off of that troop train. That troop train cost them money. I'm sure. I'll tell you this. I'm sure that they made a beautiful profit off the train. They just didn't make the margin of profit that they intended to make.
Well, they were feeding you mush and things, and that was it.
Yeah.
$3 a meal. That's, they were making money.
I mean, if we stopped at or went out to a regular restaurant that would take those tickets, we could buy a feast. And they were giving us garbage. And I said, there's just something in me that don't go for that kind of stuff. And so I almost Bolsheviked a troop train.
Let's get back to the troop ship. There were some convicts on there, some men who'd been arrested for various things. Let's talk about that for a minute.
This is another thing that I really got rooked into. I got on the ship and I found a real neat little berth that was kind of off the beaten track, and I got it cleaned up. I got it real neat, and had it just as really did it up nice. And there was a lieutenant colonel came in there, and he said, "Whose is this?" And I said, "This is mine." I said, "I've got it all set up." And he said, "Real nice." And you know, he said, and a few minutes later, I got called into a place, and they said, "Are you Sergeant Wheeler?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You're going to have to move out of that little place you got up there." And I knew that colonel had thrown me a curve. I knew that he was going to take it over. But he says they're putting you in charge of the prisoners down in the hold. And said, you'll have to give up that little berth you got up there and move down there with them. Well, the only reason that I got that job is that colonel wanted my place up there. And he got it. He moved in there. And so I had to move. I mean, you don't tell those high-ranking people to drop dead. So I went and moved out, and I had a nice place down there. to myself, it was fairly nice, but I wound up with all the responsibility of these prisoners, and most of these prisoners were lifers. And so I know that I remember that some of those prisoners had committed a murder in London, had killed a taxi cab driver, and got some money, and they got life out of it. I don't know why they didn't shoot them, but they got life. And another group of the prisoners had come in from Italy into Litchfield, England for their court martial. And what had happened, they were black troops, and they were on driving trucks, and they were supposed to go across an open terrain and evacuate some people that were sort of trapped back in there. And when they started in this open terrain, the Germans had it zeroed in, and man, they were just blasted away. And these guys just stopped and said, "We're not driving in there. That's absolute suicide." And they said that some of the people, there was a white sergeant, I think some officer in charge, and they said, "All you people that refuse to go across that, come up here and line up." Well, only the front trucks, 3 or 4 or 5 people, got out of the front trucks and lined up because they were at the front. And the others didn't line up. They just didn't get out and didn't line up. They just sat back there in those trucks. And so this captain said, "Shoot the bastards." And this white sergeant just let them have it. And so the others still would go. They just got out of their trucks and ran. And so anyhow, they court-martialed them, and they all got life out of it not for disobeying a direct order under fire. And so there was all kinds of guys that had, I know there was one guy that got 20 years for stealing $5 out of his own cash register, and he was the barber. So it must have been a real chicken that got him. And he was a pretty nice guy. I really had some sympathy for him. But anyhow,
I had sympathy for the guys that didn't want to go through a field with sure death.
But anyhow, I've got this thing organized pretty good where these prisoners could be fed and be taken care of and in an orderly way, and they fed them pretty good. And I kind of encouraged that. And so I treated these people as nice as I could and still maintain the dignity of being in charge. But these guys would say, "Wheeler, could I come out and clean your room?" And boy, they'd mop my room, they'd mop the floor, they'd make my bed, they even did my laundry, they pressed my clothes, and they spit shined my shoes.
You were better off than the colonel.
Yeah, and whenever I got, by the way, whenever I got into New York, I stepped aboard that, stepped off of that boat. I looked like I just stepped out of a bandbox. I mean, I was sharp. Those guys really did. But anyhow, what was kind of funny is I told these kids about this colonel kicking me out, getting me kicked out of the room, and getting me sitting down there in charge of that thing for no other reason than to get my bed. And one of these prisoners said, "Wheeler," said, "I've got nothing to lose." He said, "I'm facing life." He said, "Would you like me to go kill that colonel for me?" I said, "Oh, God, no." I know. I said, "I might be in there with you doing life if I went along with that." And he says, "Well, if you want him killed, I don't think I've got much to lose. He's a dead man."
I bet he'd have done it too.
Oh, I think he'd have done it in a minute. But, you know, those prisoners took care of me, and whenever they got ready to go, they all said goodbye. And I remember whenever they sent that shore patrol and military police down there to take those people off of that boat, I remember just seeing the fear in their eyes. Because, boy, I tell you, there's a mean-looking bunch that come in there to get them. And I know that most of those guys were going right straight into Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. But I gave them a pretty good break. I treated them as decent as I could, and still maintained complete and tight control. And they did everything in the world for me. I think I probably did live better than that colonel up there. and I had everything pretty organized. But I could have had that colonel's life, I can tell you that. I'm just as sure that if I'd said go for him, that would have been a dead colonel. But I sure backed off of that one in a hurry. No, I didn't want any part of that. I think that would have been murder, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it would have been murder. Well, I sure backed off of that one in a big hurry. I did play around with the thought a little bit,
Yeah.
but not very long. It didn't
That's
take me
amazing.
that long to say no thanks, but no thanks, you know.
You know, we got you all the way out of England, and so far you haven't shot down a plane. Which ones did you shoot down?
Well, I got, I think I got the first one that blasted away at me, but I saw the fire off the Cowlings, and I was shooting at me and some more guys were shooting at a Junkers 88 that was way out lobbing rockets, but I swear that I saw my tracers go right into that thing before it exploded. So I think I got that one. And I shot at another one that just as we were leaving the enemy coast, that went out of control and went down through the overcast, but because nobody ever saw him hit the ground,
They gave you a
they
problem.
only gave me a probable. And it's hard to tell if you got them because you're flying in a real tight formation, so that as a group you can put out real heavy firepower. And when that plane comes in on you, it's very rarely that you're the only man that's shooting at the thing. But I felt that I've had some kills. I know one time that the guy was just looking right at me, and I blasted it, and I blasted and I saw the canopy just fly off of the plane. And I know that nobody was close enough to shoot him. If they'd have been shooting at him, they'd have been shooting at me, because I was tailing Charlie, and he was coming right straight in on my tail. If anybody else had been shooting at him, I'd have felt like shooting at them because they'd been too close to me. So it's hard to say, Phil, just how many
4 or
people.
5, 6.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Hard to say. You just
Officially, what was it? Several probables and
Well, officially, I'd say maybe three kills and a probable. But but there were others that I really felt that I was in the act of. Now what else?
Well, we have you on the troop train, and let's get you off the troop train, and let's meet Bobby for the first time.
Well, I got off this troop train up in L.A. and I caught a train into San Diego, and I met your mother at San Diego Station, and she was right there with Bobby. And I don't know what in the world happened to me, but whenever I was going over to meet Lily, I gave her a kiss, and she handed me Bobby, and I took him, and I shook so bad when I took that baby. I shook so bad, I said, I feel like I'm having a nervous breakdown. Lily, take that baby. And I just shook like a leaf. I was just emotion.
Probably the release of the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing sort of come hanging down. But I was scared to death that I was going to drop that baby because I was just shaking like a leaf. And I never felt so weak and so nervous and so, and I was so glad to see him that I just emotionally broke, you know. Just,
Yeah. It's kind of like that time I stepped on that rattlesnake. I wasn't scared until after I'd thrown rocks at him till I thought he was dead. Came all the way home, laid on the couch, heard the phone ring, and broke into a cold sweat. I mean to tell
well,
you.
that's exactly, that's the darndest experience I ever had. When I wanted to see that boy, I was determined that no German on earth was going to keep me from seeing that baby. And when I got home, I was so nervous I couldn't hold the baby. It just sat there and shook, and I was scared to death I was going to drop that baby. And it was just emotionally wrung out, you know. It come all hanging down. And tears were just rolling down my cheeks. I was flowing a river. And couldn't hold my kid. They just come unglued there for about 10 minutes.
But you were home.
Oh, yeah. I had the darndest experience I ever had.
Where did you stay when you first came home?
Well, we just got on the bus, went over to Church Avenue there on the corner in the big house. I stayed there about a week and then we went from, they kept Bobby because I had
Did you
orders.
do some debriefing in Santa Monica?
Well, what we did, see, returned combat people, they really gave us a special red carpet treatment. And the Air Force had rented the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Santa Monica. And it was just absolutely gorgeous. And so everybody, all of we combat people, instead of sending us to one of these crude rifle depots, a replacement depot where they treat you like cattle, they sent us to the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Santa Monica and let us bring our wives and keep them in this Edgewater Beach Hotel with us in those nice plush rooms. And they had special entertainment for us. I remember they had a girl, a lady who was an Arthur Murray dance instructor. And this was at the Miramar Hotel. And Lily and I went over to take those lessons. And I remember this lady picked me to demonstrate a step to some of these other people. And she liked dancing with me. And she wanted to use me as her example on how to give these dance instructions. And Lily come over and grabbed me in the arm and said, "Your Arthur Murray dancing is over, Buster. We're leaving."
Yeah.
So I
told about that in her history.
Yeah, so my Arthur Murray lessons ended in a great big hurry. But some other entertainment that they had, some other things that they did while we were in that big swank Edgewater Beach is they took us to Hollywood. They showed us, I remember Harold Lloyd had one very gorgeous home. It was Harold Lloyd, it was an old comic, like Charlie
I know
Chaplin.
exactly what it was.
And he must have made a fortune because it was the most gorgeous and biggest house, and the most plush house in Hollywood. And it was really, I remember seeing that. Then we saw Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford's home. Pickfair. Pickfair, we saw Pickfair.
You know who owns Pickfair right now?
No, I have no idea.
Jerry Buss, the guy that owns the Los Angeles Lakers.
Oh, really?
He also
well, I
owns
saw
Sephora.
Pickfair.
Yeah, he owns Pickfair.
I saw Pickfair in 1944. And Lily and I were out there on the grand tour. Then they took us into Chinatown and gave us, paid for a big Chinese dinner for us. This particular social group that was, I don't know where they raised their money, but we really got some preferential treatment. And then I remember we went to the CBS?
Could be.
Went to CBS and we saw, we saw Fibber McGee and Molly.
Oh.
And we saw Cary Grant. Cary Grant came out. And
Johnny
then
Mercer.
we also saw
You saw Johnny Mercer, I know.
oh, we saw Johnny Mercer. We heard I remember that great singer that they had. What was
Dennis
her?
Day?
Well, Dennis Day was with Jack Benny.
Oh,
But anyhow, I'm just trying to think of this girl that was a singer. I know she was real good, but she's kind of sniffy. Sort of if Lily was here, she could tell you who the lady was. The name just eludes me here at the moment. But we really got some preferential treatment there. And then I went back to after that, I went back to the Personnel Distribution Command School. This was sort of a privilege for me. I was all set to transition into B-29s.
and join old Jimmy Doolittle again.
Yeah, go join
Saipan.
Yeah, go join Jimmy Doolittle. But anyhow, I was already on orders to go into B-29s to to transition in B-29. And they put an order up on this blackboard down on not on a bulletin board. And it said that anybody that could pass that had 2 years of college or more, or could pass that GED test, which was the equivalent of 2 years college, and pass another test, could go back to the Personnel Distribution Command School. And Lily, when she found out I was going to transition into B-29s, and by the way, the outfit that I would have transitioned into was going to Saipan, and it was a group that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's how close I came to being in that thing.
And they say that the guys on the Enola Gay had terrible traumatic psychological
repercussions from that.
What was it called? Big Boy, or what was the name of that bomb? Had a name.
Yeah, I know.
Called Big Boy or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. But anyhow, that's where I've gone. And Lily just about broke up whenever she found out I was about to transition into B-29s for Saipan. And she saw this thing up on the bulletin board, and she says, "Glenn, for goodness sakes, try for it." And I said, "Oh, Lily, I'm too dumb." I said, I don't think I could pass that test. And I said, I might not even pass the GED test. And I said, and she pushed me, and I said, okay, I'll give it a go. And I went down and I made 100% on the darn test. And I passed that GED test, 2-year college level, in flying colors. And my first interview, they took me right off of the orders to Saipan and sent me back to the most plush school you've ever seen. It was right on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. You know, you've heard of the boardwalk.
Oh yeah, Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Yeah, Atlantic City, New Jersey.
That's where the Miss America pageant.
Yeah, well, I stayed in the hotel where they had held one of the Miss America pageants.
Oh.
And did we ever live plush? Much more plush than I'd have ever lived on Saipan, I can assure you of that.
I guarantee you.
Even you can guarantee me of that, I'm sure. But anyhow.
Actually, the bomb that they dropped on Hiroshima took off from Nagasaki. No. Took off from Tinian, which is a little island right next to Saipan.
Yeah, right close. By the way,
I don't know where the one that was dropped on Nagasaki. It might have been off Saipan.
Yeah, one of them was.
There was runways both places.
Yeah, what I want to tell you is when I went to Korea, we went right through Hiroshima, and we went through Nagasaki, and we got off the train in Hiroshima. One of the things I want to tell you is I saw these railroad bridges, those girders, you know, the big old steel girders that trains go through on the bridges. Those steel girders were twisted like a pretzel and were still laying there. So, and the result of that heat, of that atomic bomb, made that metal so hard and so twisted that they couldn't do anything with it. And it's still probably laying there as twisted pretzel-looking girders to this day.
What year was that?
Went in 52. No, yeah, 50. Yeah, 52. When I saw Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But another thing I want to tell you is I never saw so many people that looked deformed or that were affected, had problems walking. I never saw so many people on crutches in my life as I saw in Hiroshima.
And this is 7 years later.
Oh yeah, and not only that, but I never saw so much hate in the eyes of people. When we got off that train in uniform, you had the feeling that you were about as welcome as a skunk at a picnic, if you'll pardon the vernacular. You could see absolute sheer hate in the eyes of these people.
It's pretty easy for them to forget about Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, they can forget all about Pearl Harbor.
Pretty hard to forget about the bomb.
Yeah, but they'll never forget about our bomb. But if they had if they hadn't started Pearl Harbor, they wouldn't have had pretzels for bridge girders either. You know?
United States never wanted to go into that war.
No.
Just the other day, I was reading it was Life magazine, it was 1939, had all the columnists in the country, Walter Winchell, you know who they all were. And there was well, even Eleanor Roosevelt was writing a column at that time. And there was about 30 of these columnists, and how they felt about it. Almost every one of them were hoping that America would go into the war. Really, the public sentiment was not to go to war at all. And the only thing that really changed public sentiment was the Japanese just simply attacking us.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor.
People didn't want to go. They didn't want to go.
That
FDR might have wanted to go.
you know, to this day, right now it looks like after Vietnam, it looks like we run with our tail between our legs. Now we're over in Beirut, we're looking just about that ridiculous over there. But let me tell you, don't ever sell the American fighting man short. You just get too close and step on his rights like they did in Pearl Harbor. And those Russian people are going to meet the most vicious enemy that they'll ever meet in this world when they tangle with the American fighting man. But until that day comes that something like Pearl Harbor takes place, you'll see actions all over the world of Americans with their tail between their legs.
Well, we look pretty ridiculous before the First and Second World Wars.
Yeah, that's true.
We weren't gearing up for war.
Don't ever tell me that the American fighting man is not the greatest. You know why we're so great?
We've got so much to defend.
Not only that, not only do we have our freedoms to defend, but we have more individual ingenuity than any nation on the world. I mean, we got, if a car needs fixing, in just a small group of men, you'll find a guy that can just do that job fantastically. And you go over in some of these other countries, those people are hard to find. It's like finding chicken teeth. They just don't have the versatility that we do. You know, I was talking to Dennis, and he said that he knew some people that escaped out of East Germany and came into West Germany, and they were so accustomed to being told just what to do that they could not live in a free existence. It just had to be told what to do. And they wound up dropping pills. They wound up going absolutely crazy because they didn't have that initiative to do things on their own. What do I do? What do I dare do? What can I do? They've been told what to eat, what to wear, where to work, how hard to work, and they just can't make it on their own. And you can turn any old GI in the world loose, and he's got something to do. He'll figure out a way to do it, and he'll figure out some of the most ingenious ways to do it that you can imagine. And we've got so much going for us, not only because the freedoms that we cherish are the greatest blessings on the face of the earth. We got other things that give us an edge. When it really comes down to the old nitty-gritty. Don't you think that?
Well, I think that it's true. I don't know if it's as true as it ought to be, but
well,
it's true.
It's true when the chips are down.
Mm-hmm.
When those men are committed, you sure got yourself an enemy. You better be on. I'll tell you this: you better be on the American side, because we can sure come up with some ingenious ways to make anything that we're given work.
Mm-hmm.
And
good old Yankee know-how.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of know-how over in Japan and some of these other industrial countries, but somehow or another, somebody's got to be at the head of somebody's really got to be behind them and push and shove and point. They don't have that old Yankee ingenuity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way I know to say it. What else can we talk about?
Well, we've pretty well got you out of
World War II.
Yeah, out of World War II, and let's take you up to Auburn and all of those other little stops along the way.
Well, I went back to the Personnel Distribution Command, and when I first came back, I went to few people what was happening that caused me to go to that Personnel Distribution Command School was that whenever, Army and Army Air Corps were all Army. We weren't, being in the Air Force, it wasn't a separate branch.
No, right.
And a lot of people that had a lot of Air Force know-how, Army Air Corps know-how, would go into a military hospital. And whenever they discharged them, that military hospital, they were Army, just plain Army. And so a lot of our Air Force trained people were being sent into casual pools, and whenever they processed them right out into an infantry division. And we were losing all kinds of Air Force talent. And when I didn't find that much at Fort Ord, because most of the people that came in there were strictly infantry and artillery. But occasionally we would find one. But what I did find one time was there was a guy, a guy that was civil service over in Europe, and he had a problem, and he had to come back to the States to get his medical problem resolved, and they resolved it completely. But he was a specialist on the Norden bomb site. And the Norden bomb site was so highly classified that he could tell you about it. It was top secret. And they had these reticles that form on a target. And you know what these reticles were made out of? Black widow spider webs, somehow or another. But anyhow, they could frame this reticle at 30,000 feet on a target, and it was so accurate that they could just annihilate that target if they could see it. And this guy was an absolute specialist, civil service specialist in that Norden bomb site, top secret. And I found him. And you know where they were about to put him in? A casual infantry pool to go to the Pacific. And I wrote a letter back to Atlantic City, and they sent me a letter that said, send that man right down to Santa Monica. And I went in and I said, cut this with a gentleman's signature, and I said, send this man to Santa Monica. So I picked up a few, but Fort Ord just wasn't the place. But DeWitt General Hospital was having all kinds of trouble keeping top Air Force talent. And even Uncle Gale came into DeWitt when I was there. And Uncle Gale is one of the top mechanics in the country, and he still is. You know that. He can fix anything in the world.
Yeah, he's good.
He's good. And, he would have been sent to an infantry casualty pool if he hadn't been so bad off they had to discharge him let him out. So they sent me from Fort Ord into DeWitt General Hospital, which was Auburn. And when we got to Auburn, we first lived down in Grass Valley, which was quite a distance. And I didn't mind that too much because I got a car, and being in Grass Valley, I got a lot of gas rations. And I got enough gas rations that I could do a little extra driving on the side. And I was kind of eager to see a little bit of the country after I got back anyway. But anyhow, they tightened up on my gas rations. And so I decided to see what I could find in Auburn. And I found this home out in the country, a big ranch. Had a country house on this ranch. And it was just about a quarter of a mile from where I worked at DeWitt General Hospital. And they had a great big natural spring with some of the coldest water in that spring you ever tasted, and just as clear as a bell. And it was a cherry farm, and Lily and I canned hundreds and hundreds of quarts of cherries. We had
Uncle Gil helped you, she said.
we canned enough cherries that the Air Force moved at their expense everything that we had. And before we used those cherries up, I think we'd moved from Auburn to anyhow, we got a lot of those cherries sent with us home. And whenever Lily come back in the service, we still had cherries. So I got the orders to move those cherries the first time that she joined me. I think she even brought some cherries to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, at military expense that we'd canned up there in Auburn. So we just loved it out there in Auburn. It was a beautiful place and had a big natural stream on it and that big natural spring. Just was peaceful out there, just really peaceful. Lily and I were very happy there in Auburn. Then I got out of the service. Then I went to work for the Santa Fe Railroad in the claims department. But somehow or another, I just didn't like it. And I really, one of the things that made me not like it is their retirement plan wasn't all that great. And I got to thinking, when I went in the service, you were in for duration plus 6 months. And I went in 1940, and I didn't get out until, I wasn't eligible to get out until 45, and I only had 15 years to go for as good a pension as you get. And to this day, I think the best thing I ever did was stay in the military and get that pension, because I had the right of my...
You didn't have to wait till 65 to draw it either. You drew it when you got out.
I drew it when I got out. I've been drawing it for, 22 years. I've been drawing it. It's regular as clockwork. And I'm going to still continue to draw it. And if I live to be 100 and a mite, some of my people do have longevity. I'll be getting it, I guess.
You probably outlived me.
Yeah, you know. But anyhow, I think it was a pretty good thing. Well, that brings us, I'm getting a little tired, so why don't we just kind of hang it up?
Okay. Well, that'll end for tonight. You know, we talked for 2 hours and 27 minutes. Okay, now, we're recording now. And Grandma, you have in your hands a picture. What is